Blood stained the pristine marble floors of the restaurant, pooling around the most feared man in the city. Everyone ran except for one terrified overweight waitress. She didn't see a ruthless mob boss gasping for his last breath. She just saw a man dying, and that choice changed everything. The heavy waistband of Harper's black uniform skirt dug painfully into her soft stomachs, a persistent reminder of a 14-hour shift that simply refused to end. At 240 pounds, Harper Miller was well aware of how she was perceived in the gilded high society world of Il Forno di Napoli, the most exclusive underground dining room in the city. To the billionaires, politicians, and notorious underworld figures who frequented the dimly lit establishment, she was practically invisible. She was the heavy-footed girl who kept their water glasses full, a silent fixture fading into the opulent velvet wallpaper. But tonight, invisibility was impossible. Lorenzo Falcone had commandeered the main dining room. He was a man carved from ice, and Violence, the undisputed head of the Falcone crime syndicate. Clad in a custom three-piece charcoal suit that screamed of European tailoring, Lorenzo possessed a sharp, predatory jawline and eyes as flat and black as a starless night. He was flanked by his underboss, a slick, smiling man named Carmine, and a dozen heavily armed enforcers standing like gargoyles in the shadows. Harper nervously wiped her sweaty palms on her apron as she carried a silver tray bearing a vintage bottle of Barolo wine to Lorenzo's table. She hated serving him. The sheer gravity of his presence made the air in the room feel thin, suffocating. "Pour," Carmine ordered, his voice slick with an unsettling charm. Harper's hands trembled slightly as she tipped the bottle, the dark red liquid cascading into Lorenzo's crystal glass. Lorenzo didn't even glance at her. She stepped back, retreating to the safety of the mahogany bar, leaning her heavy frame against the counter as she watched from a distance. Lorenzo raised the glass to his lips, acknowledging a toast from Carmine. He swallowed. 3 seconds later, the glass shattered against the marble floor. Lorenzo let out a ragged, guttural gasp, his hands flying to his throat. The imposing mob boss crashed forward onto the table, overturning plates of truffle risotto and sending silverware clattering. His chair tipped backward, and he hit the floor with a sickening thud. Chaos erupted instantly. "Boss!" one of the guards shouted, reaching for his weapon, but before anyone could assess the situation, the front windows of the restaurant exploded. A hailstorm of bullets tore through the dining room. Gunfire deafened the air, mixing with the screams of the few remaining staff members. Harper hit the floor behind the solid oak bar, curling her large body into the tightest ball she could manage. She covered her ears, sobbing, as shards of glass and splintered wood rained down on her back. Peeking through the gap beneath the bar stools, she saw the horrifying truth of the ambush. Carmine, the smiling underboss, had not drawn his weapon. Instead, he was stepping backward, casually retreating toward the kitchen exit, while the loyal guards were systematically gunned down by unseen assailants outside. It was a coup. The gunfire abruptly ceased, leaving behind a ringing silence, punctuated only by the wet, choking sounds coming from the center of the room. Harper peered out. The hitmen hadn't entered yet, likely waiting for the poison to finish the job before sweeping the building. Lorenzo Falcone was convulsing. His face was a terrifying shade of violet veins bulging against his neck. Foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth. "He's going to die," Harper thought, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every survival instinct screamed at her to run out the back door, to vanish into the night. She owed this ruthless criminal nothing. He was a monster who ran the city's underworld. But as she watched him seize his dark eyes, locking onto hers through the wreckage, something broke inside her. She didn't see a mob boss. She saw a human being drowning in agonizing pain. Strychnine or cyanide, Harper muttered frantically, her mind flashing back to a high school chemistry class and the myriad of true crime documentaries she binge-watched in her lonely apartment. She needed to absorb it. She needed charcoal, the wood-fired pizza oven. Ignoring the screaming protests of her own mind, Harper scrambled on her hands and knees, her thick thighs scraping painfully against shattered glass. She ignored the sting. She hauled herself into the open kitchen. The massive brick oven was still radiating intense heat. Grabbing a heavy iron scraper, she yanked out a pile of glowing, blackened wood chunks, throwing them onto a metal prep table. Snatching a heavy marble pestle, she pulverized the burnt wood into a gritty black powder, dumping it into a large metal pitcher of distilled water. She rushed back out to the dining room, the heavy pitcher sloshing. Lorenzo was barely moving now, his eyes rolling back. "Don't die, you stubborn bastard, don't die," Harper panted, dropping heavily to her knees beside him. She grabbed him by his thick, tailored lapels and hauled his upper body off the ground. He was incredibly heavy, a solid mass of muscle, and the physical effort made Harper groan, sweat pouring down her face. She pried his rigid jaw open with shaking fingers. "Drink this," she commanded, her voice surprisingly steady. "Swallow it." She forced the sludgy black liquid into his mouth. Lorenzo choked instinctively, fighting her, his large hand weakly gripping her wrist. But Harper used her body weight, leaning over him, forcing him to keep his head tilted back. "Swallow." He gagged and swallowed convulsively. Seconds ticked by like hours. Then Lorenzo lurched sideways. Harper barely scrambled out of the way before he violently vomited the black sludge and the poisoned wine onto the floor. He lay there gasping, taking in ragged, shallow breaths. The violent violet hue of his skin slowly began to recede, replaced by a deathly ashen pallor. He was alive, but barely. A heavy thud from the front doors made Harper freeze, boots crunching on glass. The hitmen were coming inside to confirm the kill. There was no time to think. Harper grabbed Lorenzo by the collar of his ruined suit jacket. "Come on," she grunted, straining with everything she had. Her muscles screamed in protest as she dragged his dead weight toward the kitchen. She found a heavy-duty rolling utility cart used for sacks of flour. With a Herculean effort that left her breathless and dizzy, she managed to roll him onto the bottom shelf of the cart. Pushing the cart through the swinging doors, Harper fled into the dark, rain-slicked alleyway, just as the beam of a tactical flashlight swept through the dining room behind them. The rain was coming down in freezing sheets, plastering Harper's hair to her face and soaking her uniform through. The alleyway was pitch black. She pushed the heavy utility cart over cracked pavement, the small wheels rattling dangerously loudly. Every muscle in her body was burning. The physical exertion was pushing her to her absolute limits. Her chest heaved, her lungs burning with every desperately drawn breath. "Just a little further," she whispered to herself, tears of exhaustion mingling with the rain. She reached the end of the alley where her beat-up 2008 Honda Civic was parked under a flickering street lamp. Getting Lorenzo into the passenger seat was a nightmare. He was completely unresponsive, a heavy, limp giant. She had to wedge her body against his, using her hips and legs to leverage his weight upward, grunting loudly as she finally shoved him into the car and slammed the door shut. She collapsed into the driver's seat, her hands shaking so violently she could barely insert the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. Harper slammed her foot on the gas, tearing out of the alleyway and disappearing into the labyrinth of the city's crumbling South Side district, just as a pair of black SUVs pulled up to the front of the restaurant. 30 minutes later, Harper dragged Lorenzo up 3 flights of stairs to her cramped, dingy apartment on Elm Street. The wooden stairs groaned under their combined weight. By the time she managed to dump him onto her sagging, floral-patterned sofa, Harper's legs completely gave out. She collapsed onto the threadbare rug, lying there for 10 minutes, just trying to remember how to breathe. When she finally found the strength to stand, she locked the deadbolt, drew the cheap plastic blinds, and turned to look at the man she had just stolen from the jaws of death. Lorenzo looked terrible. His expensive suit was ruined with water vomit and charcoal. He was shivering violently, trapped in the grips of a feverish shock. Harper stripped off her wet apron and went to work. She fetched warm water, clean towels, and heavy blankets. She carefully removed his jacket and tie, unbuttoning his tailored shirt to wipe the grime from his chest. She couldn't help but notice the myriad of old scars crisscrossing his skin, a road map of a deeply violent life. She draped 2 heavy duvets over him, adjusting a pillow under his head. Then, exhausted beyond measure, she slumped into a cheap armchair across from the sofa and fell into a restless, paranoid sleep. A sudden, terrifying pressure on her windpipe jerked Harper awake. She gasped, her eyes flying open. It was morning. Grey light filtered through the blinds. Lorenzo was off the couch. He was standing over her, moving with terrifying, predatory silence, despite his obvious weakness. His large, bruised hand was wrapped tightly around her thick neck, pinning her against the back of the armchair. His eyes were no longer dull. They were sharp, dangerous, and utterly merciless. "Who sent you?" His voice was a harsh, raspy whisper, grinding out like crushed stones. Harper clawed at his hand, her legs kicking out. "Nin. No one." She choked out tears of absolute terror, springing to her eyes. "Let go." Lorenzo leaned in closer, his gaze sweeping over her small, cluttered living room, then back to her face. He took in her tear-stained cheeks, her messy bun, her plus-sized frame, trembling in a damp, wrinkled restaurant uniform. He processed the environment instantly, the cheap furniture, the stack of past-due bills on the counter, the complete lack of tactical advantage. "Where are my men?" he demanded, loosening his grip just enough to let her breathe. "Dead," Harper gasped, rubbing her throat as she shrank back into the chair. "They're all dead. Carmine set you up. I saw him. He stepped back right before the shooting started. You were poisoned." Lorenzo froze. The mention of Carmine's betrayal flickered in his dark eyes, a flash of lethal realization. He slowly released her, taking a staggered step backward. He leaned heavily against the wall, a grimace of pain crossing his face as he pressed a hand to his stomach. "You," Lorenzo said, looking at her with a piercing intensity that made Harper want to hide. It wasn't the look of disgust or dismissal she usually received from men like him. It was a look of cold, calculating appraisal. "You're the waitress. You gave me the charcoal. I couldn't just let you die," she whispered, looking down at her hands. She felt deeply self-conscious suddenly under his unblinking stare. She knew she looked like a mess, a heavy, sweaty, terrified mess. Before Lorenzo could speak again, the small television in the corner of the kitchen, which Harper had left on mute the night before, flashed with a breaking news banner. Harper grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. A polished news anchor appeared on the screen, looking gravely serious. "We are following a developing story out of the downtown district. Authorities have confirmed a massive shootout at the exclusive Il Forno di Napoli restaurant late last night. Police sources confirm that notorious crime syndicate boss Lorenzo Falcone was the target of the assassination and is presumed dead, his body missing from the scene." Lorenzo's expression remained a mask of stone. The anchor continued. "However, a shocking twist in the investigation has emerged. Surveillance footage recovered from a nearby alleyway shows a restaurant employee moving what appears to be Falcone's body. Police have identified the suspect as 26-year-old Harper Miller. Harper's blood ran completely cold. A photo of her driver's license flashed on the screen. The interim head of the Falcone organization, Carmine Rossi, has publicly offered a staggering $5 million reward for information leading to the capture of Harper Miller, who is now believed to be a rogue assassin hired by a rival family to poison Falcone. The remote slipped from Harper's trembling fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. The most dangerous man in the city had just framed a broke, overweight waitress for the murder of a mafia boss, and the man she was accused of killing was currently standing in her living room, watching her. Lorenzo pushed himself off the wall. The weakness in his posture vanished, replaced by an aura of deadly intent. He looked at the television, then back at Harper. "Well, Harper Miller," Lorenzo said softly, a dark, dangerous promise lacing his words. "It seems we are both being hunted." Panic seized Harper's chest, tight and unforgiving, as she stared at the television. The screen still displayed her face, effectively painting a $5 million target on her back. She backed away from Lorenzo, her breath hitching in her throat. Her small, mundane life had just been violently shattered. "We have to go." Lorenzo stated, his voice completely devoid of panic, operating on pure tactical instinct. He grabbed the remote from the floor, shutting off the television. "Carmine will have every dirty cop and street corner thug in the city looking for this address. Get your keys. Grab whatever cash you have." Harper scrambled to her tiny bedroom. She pulled a faded duffel bag from the bottom of her closet, frantically stuffing it with sweatpants, oversized t-shirts, and the emergency envelope of cash, barely $600, she kept hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of a romance novel. She caught a fleeting glimpse of herself in the vanity mirror, flushed, heavy, terrified, and entirely out of her depth. This wasn't supposed to be her life. She was just a waitress who liked baking and true crime podcasts. "Move," Lorenzo commanded from the doorway. He had donned his ruined charcoal suit jacket, attempting to hide the blood and ash that stained his shirt. They didn't make it to the front door. The distinct, terrifying screech of tires echoed from the street below, followed immediately by the slamming of heavy car doors. Harper crept to the window, peeking through a crack in the cheap plastic blinds. 3 black armored sedans had blocked off Elm Street. Men in dark winter coats holding suppressed weapons were already moving rapidly toward the building's main entrance. "The fire escape," Harper whispered, absolute terror, making her voice tremble. "Through the kitchen window. It leads down to the back alley." Lorenzo nodded once. He led the way, pushing the rusted kitchen window up with a sharp grunt of effort. He slipped through the opening with a practiced, predatory agility, despite his poisoned state. Harper quickly followed, but as she tried to maneuver through her thick hips, caught painfully on the narrow wooden window frame. Panic flared hot and bitter in her throat. She pushed, grunting with exertion, her soft stomach scraping against the splintered sill. "I'm stuck!" She gasped, hot tears of frustration springing to her eyes. "I'm too big, just go! Leave me here!" Lorenzo didn't run. He reached through the open window, his large, scarred hands gripping her waist firmly. "You saved my life. I do not leave my people behind. Now push!" With a desperate, adrenaline-fueled heave, and Lorenzo pulling with all his remaining strength, Harper tumbled out onto the rusted iron grating of the fire escape. They scrambled down the metal stairs just as Harper's apartment door splintered inward, 3 floors above them. The alleyway below was slick with rotting garbage and freezing rain. They bypassed her Honda Civic, it was too recognizable now, and ran toward the darkened end of the block. "There," Lorenzo pointed to an older model, dark blue Ford F-15, parked near a chain-link fence. He smashed the driver's side window with a rapt fist, unlocked the door, and ruthlessly ripped the steering column casing away to hotwire the engine. Within seconds, the heavy truck roared to life. They sped out of the city limits, taking the neglected pothole-ridden back roads toward Interstate 84, aiming for the quiet rural anonymity of the Pennsylvania state line. The silence in the cab was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers. Harper clung to the passenger door, her heavy thighs pressing together, trying desperately to make herself appear small. She felt a profound wave of shame washing over her about getting stuck in the window. It was a glaring, humiliating reminder of the body she had always tried so desperately to hide from the world. "You did exceptionally well back there," Lorenzo said quietly, his dark, calculating eyes fixed firmly on the dark road ahead. "I almost got us both killed because I couldn't fit through a stupid window," she muttered bitterly, angrily, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. Lorenzo abruptly pulled the stolen truck onto the muddy shoulder of the highway, slamming the gearshift into park. He turned entirely in his seat, his intense gaze piercing through the dim green light of the dashboard. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that demanded her complete attention. "The women in my world are decorative. They are thin, fragile, and utterly useless when the bullets start flying. When I was dying on that marble floor, choking on my own blood, not a single one of those people would have touched me. You risked your life, you dragged my dead weight out of a literal war zone, and you pulled me through that window. You are incredibly strong. Do not ever apologize for the body that kept us both alive today." Harper stared at him, utterly stunned. No man had ever looked at her quite like that. Not with condescending pity, not with fetishized curiosity, but with profound, unwavering respect. Her heart did a strange, violent flutter in her chest. They drove for another grueling 2 hours, finally pulling into a dilapidated neon-lit motel called the Starlight Motor Inn, nestled off a lonely forested stretch of highway near Scranton. Lorenzo paid for a room in the back corner, using Harper's cash registering under a fake alias. The dimly lit room smelled strongly of stale cigarettes and cheap lemon-scented bleach. There was only one sagging, queen-sized bed. "Take the bed," Lorenzo offered, heavily sinking into the lumpy floral-patterned armchair in the corner. His handsome face was pale again, the adrenaline rapidly wearing off, leaving the lingering, agonizing effects of the poison. "You're sick," Harper argued, moving bravely toward him. "You need the bed. Your body is fighting off toxins. I need to watch the door," he countered stubbornly, crossing his arms. Harper sighed deeply, the maternal caring instinct that made her an excellent waitress completely taking over. She marched into the tiny bathroom, soaked a scratchy washcloth in freezing cold water, and walked back to him. Gently, tentatively, she pressed the cool cloth to his burning forehead. Lorenzo's dark eyes fluttered closed, a ragged, grateful sigh escaping his lips. He leaned into her gentle touch, his large hand coming up to softly grasp her thick wrist. "Thank you, Harper," he murmured softly. In the quiet, tense intimacy of the motel room, the ruthless mob boss and the chubby waitress sat in comfortable silence, an unbreakable, profound bond rapidly forging between them in the fiery crucible of their shared survival. 2 agonizingly slow days crawled by in the stifling, paranoid confines of the Starlight Motor Inn. Lorenzo utilized a cheap, prepaid, cellular phone Harper had bravely purchased from a dusty local gas station to make 3 concise, heavily encrypted phone calls. He was meticulously assembling the scattered pieces of a fractured criminal empire, desperately searching for the few hardened men whose absolute loyalty to him ran far deeper than that dirty blood money. On the third gloomy evening, as a violent thunderstorm raged violently outside their cheap window, Lorenzo finally hung up the plastic receiver and looked directly at Harper. She was sitting with crossed legs on the sagging edge of the uncomfortable mattress, nervously consuming a stale powdered donut to calm her deeply frazzled nerves. "Tonight," Lorenzo announced abruptly, his dark eyes suddenly glittering with a cold, lethal anticipation. "Carmine is holding a highly classified emergency summit at the abandoned Brighton shipping warehouse located on Pier 44, over in Brooklyn. He fully intends to formally take complete control of the Falcone syndicate tonight and permanently distribute my highly lucrative downtown territories to the greedy rival families." Harper stood up bravely, smoothing the oversized grey cotton shirt over her curves. "How do we possibly stop him?" Harper asked, wiping white powdered sugar from her trembling lips. Her initial paralyzing fear was now completely overshadowed by a fierce, undeniable loyalty to the incredibly dangerous man standing right before her. "We do not stop him," Lorenzo corrected sharply, expertly checking the loaded metallic magazine of a dark pistol he had stealthily acquired from a loyal contact earlier that rainy afternoon. "We completely destroy him, but I desperately need a believable distraction to get inside the building before his heavily armed perimeter guards lock the entire industrial facility down for the long night." Harper took a deep breath, pushing past her terrible insecurities. "I will do it," she stated firmly. Lorenzo immediately shook his head, his chiseled jaw clenching in obvious frustration. "Absolutely not. It is entirely too dangerous. You will stay here, where it is safe. They are actively looking for a highly trained, ruthless professional assassin," Harper reasoned logically, her voice surprisingly steady and remarkably confident. "They are definitely not looking for a fat, terrified delivery girl carrying a large stack of pizzas. I can easily get up to the main front door and make a very loud, distracting public scene. That will efficiently draw the guards out into the open. It is honestly the only logical way you can smoothly slip through the back loading dock entirely unseen." Lorenzo stared at her deeply, assessing her incredibly stubborn determination. He stepped forward, gracefully, completely bridging the small physical gap between them. He reached out slowly, his warm, rough hand gently cupping her soft, full cheek. His thumb brushed affectionately over her pale skin. "If absolutely anything happens to you tonight, Harper, I swear to God, I will brutally burn this entire city to the very ground. Do you understand me completely?" She nodded silently, her breath catching painfully in her throat at the raw, unfiltered intensity of his dark gaze. 3 tense hours later, the Brighton shipping warehouse stood tall like a dark, imposing fortress, entirely surrounded by heavily armed guards and luxury black vehicles. The freezing rain had angrily returned, slicking the uneven cobblestone pier. Harper, wearing a bright yellow plastic rain poncho over her everyday clothes and carrying 3 large, greasy pizza boxes she had recently purchased from a nearby corner shop, marched directly toward the heavily guarded main entrance, her pounding heart hammering a frantic, completely terrified rhythm. "Hey, stop right there!" a burly guard shouted aggressively, stepping out quickly from the dark shadows of a rusted metal awning, his right hand resting identically menacingly on the leather holster sitting at his wide hip. A second tall guard stepped up directly beside him, shining a blinding tactical flashlight completely into her frightened face. "Delivery for Carmine Rossi," Harper yelled back loudly over the pouring rain, purposely pitching her voice to sound highly annoyed and entirely unintimidated. "Extra cheese, absolutely no olives, and you better tip very well because it is miserable out here tonight. You hear me clearly." The two tough guards exchanged highly confused, highly irritated glances. "We did not order any pizza," the first one growled menacingly, stepping slightly closer to aggressively inspect her bright yellow poncho. "Look, buddy, I just passionately deliver the terrible food." Harper huffed dramatically, shifting her significant weight and jutting her wide hip out aggressively expertly, playing the demanding role of the disgruntled, overworked employee utterly perfectly. "If you do not want it, I am gladly taking it right back to the shop, but I am definitely keeping the cash." The angry guards immediately stepped away to argue with her loudly. A dark shadow smoothly detached itself from the side of the cold brick building. Lorenzo moved with terrifying, completely ghostly silence, slipping perfectly behind the heavily distracted guards, and quietly through the slightly ajar side door of the back loading dock before they even registered a single sound. Harper courageously maintained the loud, ridiculous argument for another agonizing 30 seconds, her pulse roaring deafeningly in her ears, before aggressively shoving the warm pizzas directly into the closest male guard and his broad chest. "Keep it!" she yelled, turning abruptly and walking very quickly away into the rainy night mission, complete. Inside the sprawling, smoky warehouse, Carmine stood proudly at the head of a long wooden table. "With Lorenzo permanently gone, we usher in a beautiful new era," Carmine proclaimed arrogantly, raising his crystal glass. "I would not drink that." A chilling, familiar voice echoed loudly from the steel catwalk. Lorenzo stepped into the harsh light, looking like an avenging angel. Pure panic erupted. The loyal enforcers swarmed the room, aiming rifles at the stunned traitors. His glass shattered violently on the floor. He had lost everything. Later, Lorenzo found Harper waiting safely outside. He kissed her passionately, claiming his queen. Did this thrilling mafia romance leave you on the edge of your seat if you loved watching Harper transform from an overlooked waitress into an absolute queen? Hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this incredible story with your friends who love suspense, romance, and a fantastic plot twist. Subscribe to our channel for more intense dramatic stories just like this one, and let us know in the comments what you want to hear next.